I was working the night shift at a small hotel in Helsinki when an American couple checked in around 11 p.m. They were maybe in their 50s, tired from the flight. I handed them their room keys and said goodnight. The man looked at me for a second, then asked if I was upset about something. I told him no, I was fine. He glanced at his wife. "You sure? You seem kind of cold." I wasn't cold. I was Finnish. That was just Tuesday for me. But this moment stuck with me because it wasn't the first time. Americans often read our silence as hostility. They expect constant verbal confirmation that everything's okay, a smile, a "have a great day," some reassurance that you're happy to serve them. When they don't get it, they panic. They think they've done something wrong. They apologize for things that don't need apologies. They over-explain their simple requests. I win. Remember another guest from Texas who came down for breakfast one morning. The dining room was quiet. People ate their bread and drank their coffee. Nobody was chatting. She sat down, looked around, and whispered to her husband, "Did someone die?" No one died. It was just breakfast in Finland. But to her, the silence felt like a funeral, or the businessman from California at a hostel in Bergen. He tried making small talk with everyone in the common area, asked people where they were from, what they were doing that day. Most gave one-word answers and went back to their books. He looked confused. Later, he asked the staff if Norwegians were always this unfriendly. The staff member just shrugged and said, "We're friendly. We're just not friends yet." These moments taught me something. Americans treat silence like an emergency, like something that needs fixing immediately. They fill quiet spaces with words. Any words, because empty air makes them uncomfortable. But that was just the beginning of what I'd learn about how differently we handle the absence of noise. I've spent 15 years watching these cultural collisions unfold across 8 countries. If you want more of this perspective, the kind most travel content never touches, subscribe. I break down these patterns. Every week, I was working as a tram operator in Prague one afternoon when an American study abroad student got on. She was maybe 20, had a big backpack covered in pins. She sat near the front and immediately tried to start a conversation with the woman next to her. Asked about the best cafes in the area, whether it was safe to walk around at night, normal tourist stuff. The Czech woman gave short answers. Yes, no, maybe try the old town. Then she put her earbuds back in. The American looked hurt. She glanced around the tram, noticed everyone was either reading or staring out the window. Nobody was talking. She pulled out her phone and started a loud FaceTime call with someone back home. Talked about her day, complained about how unfriendly everyone was being, laughed really loudly at something her friend said. People started staring. Not angry stares, just curious, like they were watching something unusual happen. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and thought the attention meant people wanted to join the conversation. They didn't. When she got off 3 stops later, the tram felt lighter somehow, quieter in a good way. I worked at a pharmacy in Copenhagen for a few years after that. One Saturday, an American family came in, parents and 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10 years old. The kids were running around, touching products, asking loud questions. "Mom, what's this? Dad, can we get candy?" Normal kid behavior, but amplified. The parents weren't stopping them. They were actually engaging, answering every question at full volume. Other customers stepped back, gave them space. One elderly Danish woman raised her eyebrows at me. I just smiled and helped. The family found what they needed. The father apologized. As they checked out, said the kids were excited to be on vacation. I told him it was fine, which it was, but I understood why the other customers had looked uncomfortable. Danish children are taught early that public spaces require indoor voices. It's not about the kids being bad, it's about the American assumption that public enthusiasm is always welcome, that expressing joy loudly is the right way to share it. Here, joy can be quiet too, just as real, just less audible. A tour guide colleague told me about a group she led through a Swedish forest. It was a nature walk, supposed to be peaceful. The Americans in the group kept making observations out loud. "Look at that tree. Did you hear that bird? This is so beautiful." They weren't being obnoxious. They were genuinely excited, but the Swedish participants looked increasingly annoyed. One finally said, "We're here to experience nature, not discuss it." The Americans went quiet after that, but you could tell they felt scolded. They just wanted to share their happiness. They didn't understand that sometimes appreciation doesn't need words. Saw this again working at a museum in Amsterdam. It was a small gallery, very intimate. A couple from Georgia walked in, talking at normal conversation volume. They discussed each painting as they moved through the room. Nothing rude, just regular talking. But in that space, their voices felt enormous. Other visitors kept looking over. A Dutch staff member eventually approached them and quietly asked if they could lower their voices. The woman looked genuinely surprised. "We're not being loud," she said, which was true by American standards. The staff member just smiled and walked away. The couple tried to whisper after that, but their whispers were still louder than most people's normal voices. They left after 10 minutes. I was working behind the counter at a bakery in Stuttgart when an American in his 30s came in. He greeted me like we were old friends. Big smile. "Hey, how's your day going?" I said good morning and asked what he wanted. He seemed thrown off by my directness. Asked again how I was. Commented on the weather. Mentioned he was visiting from Seattle. I nodded and asked again what he'd like to order. He finally pointed at a pretzel and some coffee. As I rang him up, he kept trying to make eye contact, kept smiling, kept looking for some warmth in the exchange. I wasn't being cold. I was being German. We were doing a transaction, not building a friendship. He came back the next day and tried the same thing. This time, he asked my name. Told me his was Brandon. Said he was staying in the neighborhood for 2 weeks. I told him my name was Klaus and handed him his order. He looked confused as he walked away. On his third visit, he didn't try to chat, just ordered, paid, and left. I could tell he thought I didn't like him. I had no feelings about him at all. He was a customer. I was polite. That was the relationship. Later, I worked at a train station information desk in Vienna. An elderly American woman approached, asking about tickets to Salzburg. I explained the options, showed her the schedule, told her which platform. She stood there for a moment after I finished, like she was waiting for something more. Finally, she asked if I was having a good day. I said yes. She asked if I liked working there. I said it was fine. She smiled nervously and thanked me, then walked away, looking uncertain. I realized she'd wanted some personal connection, some sign that I cared about her as more than just another passenger. But I didn't know her. Why would I pretend otherwise? A restaurant manager friend in Zurich told me about an American couple who left a review, saying the staff was distant and unwelcoming. She was confused because the service had been perfect. Everything came out on time. Orders were correct. The waiter was polite, but he hadn't chatted with them between courses, hadn't asked about their day or their trip, hadn't created a sense of intimacy. To the couple, this felt like bad service. To the restaurant, it was exactly right. The meal was the experience. The waiter wasn't supposed to become part of their vacation story. I saw similar confusion at a gym in Reykjavik where I worked the front desk. An American digital nomad joined for 3 months. Every time he came in, he'd try to chat with other members, ask about their workouts, offer unsolicited advice, compliment their form. People started avoiding the equipment. Near him, he mentioned to me one day that Icelanders were hard to get to know. I explained that the gym wasn't really a social space here. People came to work out, not to make friends. He looked sad about that, said it felt lonely. I understood, but changing our entire culture to make one person feel less alone wasn't the solution. The hardest one was a honeymoon couple at a hotel in Ljubljana, where I was a concierge. They were so openly affectionate, always holding hands, kissing in the lobby, calling each other cute names. Americans do this thing where they perform their love publicly, like they want witnesses to their happiness. It's sweet, but it's also very loud emotionally. Other guests seemed uncomfortable, not because they disapproved, but because that level of emotional display in a public space felt invasive. The couple couldn't understand why people weren't smiling at them, weren't congratulating them on their marriage. They were just existing in their bubble, and everyone else was trying to exist around it. I was working as a taxi driver in Warsaw when I picked up an American businessman from the airport. He got in and immediately started talking. Told me about his flight, his meeting tomorrow, his hotel. I listened but didn't engage much beyond basic responses. After about 5 minutes, he said, "You speak English pretty well." I said, "Thank you." Then he said, "So what's your story? How'd you end up driving a taxi?" I told him I just drive. He waited for more. I focused on the road. He eventually gave up and looked out the window. When we arrived, he tipped extra and said, "Thanks for the ride, even if you're not much of a talker." I wasn't offended. I'm a driver, not a therapist. That same year, I worked at a post office in Budapest. An American expat came in regularly to mail packages back home. She always tried to explain what was inside, why she was sending it, who it was for. I didn't need to know any of that. I just needed to weigh it and calculate postage. But she'd give me entire stories. "This is for my mom's birthday. She's turning 65. We're really close, but I couldn't afford to fly home this year." I'd nod and tell her the price. She always looked slightly disappointed, like she'd given me this piece of her life, and I'd done nothing. With it, a colleague at a Copenhagen bank told me about an American customer who got upset. During a routine transaction, he'd asked her about her weekend plans, and she'd said she didn't have any yet. He acted like this was tragic, kept suggesting things she could do, places she should visit, events she might enjoy. She finally had to tell him she just wanted to process his deposit and help the next customer. He seemed hurt. Later, left feedback saying the staff was going through the motions and didn't care about customers as people. She did care. She cared enough to do her job efficiently, so he didn't have to waste his time at a bank longer than necessary. I worked at a border crossing between Poland and Germany for a while, a gap year. Traveler from Colorado came through one afternoon. Young guy, maybe 19, very chatty, asked me how my day was going, if I liked my job, whether I got bored standing there all day. I checked his passport and waved him through. He stood there for another moment, like he expected more conversation. I had cars backing up behind him. He finally moved along, but not before saying, "Y'all are really serious about this stuff, huh?" We were serious because it was literally our job to be serious. He wanted the border crossing to feel like a friendly chat. It wasn't. It was a legal checkpoint. The weirdest one was at a library in Oslo where I worked part-time. An American student came up to the desk and asked for help finding books on Norwegian history. I showed her the section, explained the organization system, and started to walk back to the desk. She followed me, still talking, told me she was writing a paper, that she found Norwegian history fascinating, that she might want to move here permanently someday. I stopped and listened politely, then excused myself to help another patron. She looked confused. Later, she approached again with a different question, and again tried to extend the conversation beyond what was necessary. Realized she was treating every interaction as a potential friendship audition. That's exhausting when you interact with 50 people a day. Most people never articulate why cross-cultural interactions feel off. They just feel the friction. I do this work full-time, watching, cataloging, connecting the dots. Subscribe if you want the explanations behind the awkwardness. But there was one story that shifted my perspective slightly. I was working at a small grocery store in Tallinn. An American woman in her 60s came in every few days. She was always very polite, very quiet, never tried to force conversation. One day she was buying bread and just started crying. Not sobbing, just tears running down her face. I asked if she was okay. She said she was fine, just lonely. Her daughter had moved to Estonia for work, and she'd come to visit for a month. Everyone was polite, but no one talked to her. She missed the random conversations she'd have in grocery stores back home, the cashiers who'd ask about her day, the strangers in line who'd comment on her purchases. She said she felt invisible. Here, I didn't know what to tell her. I couldn't change an entire culture's approach to public interaction. But I asked her how her visit was going. She lit up, told me about the places she'd seen, the food she'd tried. It took 3 extra minutes. The people in line behind her didn't seem to mind. When she left, she was smiling. I thought about that interaction for weeks. Maybe Americans aren't wrong for wanting connection. Maybe we're not wrong for valuing privacy. Maybe it's just different. And different doesn't always mean someone needs to change. The story that really stayed with me happened when I was working at a small cafe in Bruges. It was a Tuesday morning, drizzly and gray. The cafe was nearly empty. An American woman in her 40s sat by herself near the window with a book and coffee. She didn't try to talk to anyone, didn't look around expectantly for conversation, just read her book and watch the rain. After about an hour, she came up to order another coffee. When I handed it to her, she said quietly, "This is nice." The quiet. I'm not used to it, but it's nice. I asked if she was enjoying Belgium. She said she was, more than she expected to. Said she'd been anxious about the trip because people had warned her Europeans were cold. But she was starting to understand it wasn't coldness, just a different rhythm. She told me she'd grown up in Texas where silence meant something was wrong. Where you filled every gap with words to prove you were okay, that everyone was okay. It was exhausting sometimes. Being here, she could just sit. Nobody expected her to perform friendliness. Nobody needed her to constantly signal her emotional state. It was almost like being invisible, but in a good way, like she could finally just exist without an audience. I told her that was probably the best way I'd heard someone describe it. She smiled and went back to her table, stayed another 2 hours. When she left, she just nodded goodbye. No big farewell, no excessive thanks, just a quiet acknowledgement. It felt right. Think about that conversation sometimes. Americans struggle with European silence because they've been taught that silence is something to fix. That connection requires constant verbal confirmation. That relationships need to be actively maintained through regular interaction. Those aren't wrong beliefs. They've built a culture that's warm and welcoming in its own way, but they miss out on something too. The peace of not having to perform. The relief of knowing that a transaction can just be a transaction. The understanding that you can like someone without needing to know their life story. That comfort can exist in the absence of words. Could tell these stories forever. And I do, every single week. The travelers keep coming. The miscommunications keep happening. And I keep decoding them. Subscribe If you're someone who wants to understand people, not just judge them, some adjust, some struggle, some leave thinking we're all miserable robots. But a few, like that woman in Bruges, they get it. They realize silence isn't emptiness, it's just space. And sometimes space is exactly what you need. And these stories, they never stop coming because the world keeps spinning, Americans keep traveling, and the gap between expectation and reality keeps creating these small, strange, perfectly human moments of complete miscommunication.